Rain did not fall gently that night over the outskirts of Lagos. It came down like accusation, like judgment, like the sky itself had grown tired of holding back. The streetlights flickered weakly against the storm, their glow swallowed by sheets of water slamming into broken asphalt. Mud swallowed slippers. Gutters overflowed. Thunder cracked open the dark like something splitting in two. In the backyard of a cramped cement house, Amara stood barefoot in the wet soil, pulling clothes off a sagging line before the wind tore them away. The rain soaked through her faded dress within seconds, clinging to her thin frame as if even the storm refused to let her breathe freely. Her fingers worked fast, folding damp fabric into a plastic basin she balanced against her hip. Inside the house, a voice cut through the walls sharp and impatient. Amara. Not a name. A command. She did not answer immediately. She had learned the cost of answering too slowly. She had also learned the cost of answering too quickly. Another crack of thunder. Another shout from inside. The rain hit harder. And somewhere between that second and the next, fate shifted its weight. Because by the time the rain stopped, Amara would no longer have a home. Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Maybe you're in New York? Canada? Perhaps Jamaica or South Africa? We'd love to know. Amara was 21 when she discovered grief could be loud, but she had been 16 when it first broke her life in half. People think tragedy arrives like a single moment, a scream, a crash, a headline. No. Tragedy arrives and then it keeps arriving again and again in the quiet after. That evening on the express road, her father had been driving home with her mother beside him, tired but smiling, talking about small things that mattered in poor families: rent, school fees, tomorrow's market. Then came the truck. Headlights cutting through rain. Tires screaming. Metal folding like paper. And the world went white. In the hospital corridor, Amara stood holding her mother's scarf so tight it burned her palms. The walls smelled of disinfectant and other people's fear. A doctor spoke without looking her in the eyes, as if avoiding her gaze could soften the sentence. It didn't. Nothing softens that sentence. 2 bodies. 2 parents. Gone. At the funeral, the prayers floated upward and died in the open air. Red earth swallowed the coffin. Neighbors cried loudly, but when the last visitor left, the silence stayed behind like an unwanted tenant. It sat on her bed. It sat on her plate. It sat in her throat until laughter felt like betrayal. That was when Aunt Lydia stepped forward, dressed in sympathy, voice sweet enough to fool a child. She will stay with us, she said, gripping Amara's shoulder with a hand that felt heavy, not comforting. Blood is blood. Amara believed her. She thought family meant rescue. She didn't understand yet that some people don't take you in to save you. They take you in to own you. In that house she stopped being a daughter. She became hands, feet, and silence, useful only when obeying. Every day. Morning in Lydia's house did not begin with sunlight. It began with instructions. Before dawn, before the sky even decided what color it wanted to be, Amara was already awake. Sweeping the compound. Boiling water. Scrubbing plates from the night before. The broom scraped against concrete while Lydia's voice floated from the bedroom, sharp and impatient, correcting things that did not need correcting. Too slow. Too loud. Too careless. At school, she sat through lessons with an empty stomach that growled loud enough to embarrass her. The other girls sometimes turned to look. She would pretend she had coughed. Pride became her breakfast. Dignity became her lunch. Hunger became routine. In the afternoons, she worked at Mama Beezy's tailoring shop, measuring fabric, cutting clean lines, learning to notice details most people ignored. She was good. Very good. Customers trusted her hands. But every evening when she returned home, Lydia's hand would stretch out before she even crossed the doorway. You eat here, Lydia would say, plucking folded notes from Amara's palm. You sleep here. Don't forget that. Amara never forgot. How could she? Her uncle sat in the corner most nights, newspaper open, eyes scanning words he never seemed to read. When Lydia insulted her, he cleared his throat. When Lydia accused her of laziness, he adjusted his glasses. When Lydia took her money, he said nothing. That silence was louder than any shout. There was no correct version of herself in that house. If she spoke, she was disrespectful. If she stayed quiet, she was ungrateful. If she worked hard, she was showing off. If she rested, she was lazy. And slowly, Lydia's resentment grew heavier, like a storm that had been waiting for the right night to break. That night, the sky did not threaten. It attacked. Thunder rolled across the low rooftops while rain struck the zinc sheets with relentless force. Amara stepped into the kitchen with damp clothes folded against her hip, water trailing behind her bare feet. "My tea is cold," Lydia snapped without looking up. "I just made it," Amara said, already turning back toward the stove. "Are you arguing with me?" "No." There was a silence that felt sharp enough to cut skin. Lydia's eyes lifted slowly, scanning Amara as if evaluating furniture that had overstayed its usefulness. "Everything is expensive now," Lydia began, voice rising above the storm. "Electricity, food, water. And you are still here, eating like you contribute something." Amara swallowed. "I can find more work." "With what qualifications?" Lydia laughed. "You barely finished school. You're just here, taking space." Then Lydia stood abruptly and walked down the narrow hallway. When she returned, she carried a worn travel bag. "Pack your things." The words landed flat. Final. Her uncle shifted in his chair. "Maybe let her stay until morning. It's raining." "If she stays tonight," Lydia snapped, "she stays forever." Something inside Amara did not break. It hardened. She walked to the small room that had never really been hers. She opened her trunk. 2 dresses. 1 pair of sandals. A small notebook. And her mother's scarf. She pressed the fabric to her face. Lavender. Memory. Loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she did not know to whom. When she returned with the bag, Lydia had already opened the door. Rain blew in immediately, cold and unforgiving. Amara stepped forward. The door shut behind her. Not slowly. Not regretfully. It slammed. And just like that, family became a memory. If you were in Amara's position, thrown out into the rain by your own family, what would you have done? Comment below. I want to know. Rain does not care who you are. It does not soften for the abandoned. It does not hesitate for the homeless. Within minutes, Amara's dress clung to her skin, heavy and cold. Her sandals filled with water. Mud splashed up her legs as she walked down the narrow road that had once felt familiar. Tonight it felt hostile. The houses she passed were dark. Windows shut tight. Doors locked. Curtains drawn. No one opened up. No one asked questions. The world does not interrupt its comfort for someone else's suffering. She walked anyway. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Her stomach tightened painfully. She had not eaten since morning. Her shoulders ached from the weight of the small bag that carried everything she owned. The rain slowed slightly, but the wind cut across her wet skin without mercy. Ahead, the road widened and curved toward the wealthy estates she had only ever seen from a distance. Tall gates. High walls. Security posts. A different world entirely. A world where lights stayed on all night and hunger was something discussed, not lived. Tonight she had no world. Her knees finally weakened near a towering iron gate. She reached out to steady herself, fingers gripping cold metal before her body slid downward to the pavement. She sat there, soaked, shivering, alone. And for the first time that night, fear spoke clearly. What if this is how my story ends? Not loudly. Not heroically. Just quietly, in the rain. The car did not rush. It approached slowly, headlights slicing through the dark, illuminating the iron gate, the pavement, and finally her small figure pressed against the metal. It was not an ordinary car. The engine moved with restrained power, smooth and controlled, the kind built for men who do not wait at traffic lights longer than necessary. The vehicle slowed. Stopped. The lights flooded her completely. For a moment nothing happened. Inside sat Ethan Cole. 32. Founder of one of the fastest-growing logistics and AI infrastructure companies in West Africa. A self-made man who had built his empire from nothing but discipline and relentless refusal to fail. He was known in boardrooms as decisive, efficient, emotionally detached. He did not like unpredictability. And nothing about the sight before him fit into predictable categories. Most people in distress wave their hands. Knock on windows. Beg. She did none of that. She sat there, drenched, exhausted, but not pleading. Ethan did not step out immediately. He watched. Rain streaked across the tinted glass while his driver shifted slightly in discomfort. "Sir?" the driver murmured. Ethan did not answer right away. He studied the posture. The stillness. The refusal to perform desperation. That detail unsettled him. Because people who have nothing usually ask for something. She did not. After several seconds the back door unlocked. And Ethan Cole stepped out into the rain. Up close she looked younger than he expected. Rain traced the curve of her cheekbones. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of him, but from exhaustion. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "Then why are you sitting here?" There was a pause long enough to measure. I don't have anywhere else to sit, she said. No embellishment. No tears. No appeal. Truth. Plain and stripped down. Ethan's gaze sharpened. How old are you? 22. What's your name? Amara. He repeated it once quietly. Then he reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a black business card. Come to my office tomorrow. 9 a.m. If you want work. She stared at the card. You don't even know me. I know you're not begging, he said. And I know you didn't ask for help. The rain intensified between them. She took the card slowly. Gold lettering caught the streetlight. Ethan Cole. Geo. He turned toward the car, paused, and looked back at her one final time. Don't be late. The door closed. The car moved through the gates. And she stood there alone again, soaked, hungry, shaking. But not invisible. She didn't know yet that the man who drove past her gate wasn't who she thought he was. Morning in Lagos does not apologize for what happened at night. The city wakes up loud, hungry, impatient. Bus conductors shout over engines. Hawkers run between cars like they have nothing to lose. The air smells like exhaust, fried dough, and stress that never sleeps. Amara moved through it like a ghost with bruised feet. She had barely slept. A bench under a leaking shelter had been her bed. Her mother's scarf had been her blanket. Dawn found her standing at a public tap washing her face, fingers shaking as she tied her hair back and smoothed her dress as if neatness could protect her from shame. Then she saw it. Caltech Global. A glass tower rising out of Lagos Island like a monument built for people who never begged for anything. The entrance shone. The floors looked too clean to be real. Men in suits walked with the careless confidence of people who knew they belonged everywhere. Amara did not belong. But she walked forward anyway because pride didn't feed you and fear didn't give you a future. The doors opened, cold air brushing her wet skin like a slap. The lobby smelled expensive. Polished stone. Clean wood. Money. At the reception desk, a woman with sleek braids looked up once, quick and sharp like she could judge a whole life in half a second. Yes. Amara swallowed, reached into her bag and placed the black card on the desk without a speech. The receptionist's eyes dropped to the gold lettering. Something changed in her face. Not kindness. Not warmth. Just awareness. What's your name? Amara. Keys clicked fast. The receptionist glanced up again, this time with a different kind of caution. Have a seat. That was it. No laughter. No dismissal. A small win, but after the night she'd had, it felt like air returning to her lungs. Upstairs, the room she was led into was quiet in a way that felt hostile. Big table. Wide windows. The city spread out below like it belonged to someone else. Ethan Cole entered without ceremony. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He didn't pretend to be the kind of man who offered comfort. His suit was dark. His expression was blank. His eyes were sharp, sliding over Amara the way people in power look at people they can discard. He watched her posture first. Not her face. Not her clothes. Her posture. He was looking for weakness. For desperation. For performance. Amara gave him none of it. You came, he said. You told me to, she replied. A beat of silence. Tell me about yourself. She could have begged. She could have cried. She could have performed suffering like a song, the way the world demands pain be entertaining before it becomes believable. But she was tired of dancing for mercy. My parents died, she said, voice steady. I live with relatives. I work at a tailoring shop. I don't have a degree. His eyes didn't soften, but something in his attention sharpened. What skills do you have? I remember details, she said. I notice things. I work hard. He leaned back slightly. Why should I hire you? The question was a gate. A test. A reminder that he could close the door with a single word. Amara held his gaze and answered with the truth that had kept her alive through hunger and humiliation. Because I won't waste it. For the first time, Ethan didn't speak immediately. He just watched her as if that sentence had struck somewhere he didn't like to feel. He didn't give her a friendly task. He didn't hand her something simple to build confidence. Men like Ethan don't build people gently. They test them until they either stand or collapse. He placed a tablet in front of her. This is an internal logistics report, he said. One branch. Multiple shipments. There are timing issues and cost issues. My analysts have been stuck on it. Amara stared at the screen. Rows. Numbers. Codes. Routes. Charges. Her throat tightened. This wasn't tailoring. This wasn't fabric and thread. This was a world built on figures and systems and people who spoke in language that often shut others out. I've never done this, she admitted. Start, Ethan said and walked away. That was it. No encouragement. No hand-holding. Just pressure. Amara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She forced her eyes to stop panicking and start seeing. Not the whole mountain. Just the next step. She scanned. She compared. She searched for patterns the way she used to spot missing stitches in a seam. One mismatch could ruin an entire garment. One mismatch could ruin an entire operation too. Minutes passed. Then more. Her eyes burned. Her stomach twisted with hunger. But she didn't stop. Then she saw it. 3 shipments marked as weather delays, same route, same week, but the dates didn't match any reported storms in that region. Another column showed fuel charges rising in the same window. A route change. A longer drive. A convenient excuse. She cross-checked again. The numbers lined up too neatly to be accidental. Her breath caught. Amara stood and walked straight to Ethan's office door. Security hesitated, but the card she still carried seemed to protect her like a weapon. She knocked. "Come in," Ethan said without looking up. "I think I found it," she said, placing the tablet down and pointing. "These delays don't match the weather reports. And the fuel costs spike at the same time. Someone rerouted trucks and padded expenses." Ethan leaned forward. The air shifted. He stared at the screen, then looked up at her slowly, the way a man looks at something he didn't expect to exist. He pressed a button on his desk. "Call internal audit. Now." And then he said the words that changed the room's temperature. "You start today." Amara didn't walk out of that office glowing. She didn't dance. She didn't celebrate. Survival had trained her not to rejoice too loudly, because joy always seemed to provoke someone's cruelty. She returned to the operations floor and sat where she had been placed, and she kept working as if her life depended on it, because it did. The whispers began immediately. Who is she? How did she get into his office? Executive assistant? Her. People looked her up and down like they were searching for the lie that would make her easier to dismiss. Then came the small traps. A file accidentally missing pages. A meeting time changed without informing her. A task given with half the information, then watched closely to see if she would fail. Was familiar. Different building. Same human sickness. Amara didn't react the way they wanted. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't beg for acceptance. She corrected the missing pages, documented everything, and quietly placed the complete file back on the desk it belonged to, with a note that made it clear she saw what had been done. She arrived early. Left late. Learned fast. And Ethan watched her under pressure the way a man watches a bridge he doesn't fully trust yet, waiting to see if it holds. It held. One night, the office emptied until the building sounded hollow. The city lights outside the windows looked distant, like another planet. Amara was still at her desk, typing steadily, eyes heavy but focused. Ethan stepped out of his office, loosening his tie. "You're still here?" he said. She looked up. "So are you." Pause. He studied her, not her work this time. Her face. Her hands. The way she kept her bag close like someone guarding the last thing she owned. "You don't have to stay this late," he said. "I want to," she replied, then hesitated, and the truth slipped out before she could swallow it back. "If I leave early, I go back to nothing." Silence hit the space between them like a blow. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't have somewhere to stay." Her shoulders stiffened. "I'm managing." "That's not an answer," he said, voice low. Amara's eyes hardened, not in disrespect but in defense. "I don't need charity." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, and something about his expression shifted. Not softness but restraint, like a man trying not to step on a line he knows he shouldn't cross. "It's not charity," he said finally. "Company housing. Temporary staff arrangement." She didn't respond immediately, because pride had been the only thing Lydia hadn't managed to steal completely. "It will feel like charity," she said. "It will feel like policy," Ethan corrected. "Because that's what it is." Amara held his gaze, searching for mockery, for superiority, for the hidden hook. She found none. Only a stubborn insistence that sounded almost personal. "Fine," she said quietly. "Policy." Ethan nodded once, like the matter was settled. But when he turned back toward his office, he paused for half a second, as if something inside him had shifted and he didn't like it. A crack, small but real. The invitation arrived in a thick cream envelope with gold embossing, the kind of paper meant to remind you that some doors open only for the rich. Amara placed it on Ethan's desk the way she placed everything, neat, controlled, silent. "Fundraiser," she said. "Saturday. 7 p.m. Ethan glanced at it briefly. "Clear my Sunday morning." She nodded, ready to turn away. Then he added, as if it were just another instruction on a long list. You'll attend with me. Amara stopped. She turned slowly. I'm your assistant. And you represent the company, he replied. Her throat tightened. I don't belong in rooms like that. Ethan's gaze lifted fully now, sharp but steady. That is a lie people tell you until you start believing it. Amara didn't speak, but her eyes flashed with something angry. I don't have clothes for that, she said. That's solvable. And the people in that room? She started, then stopped because she didn't want to admit how much those kinds of people could make you feel small without touching you. Ethan's voice lowered. You belong anywhere you decide to stand. The words hit her harder than she expected, because nobody in Lydia's house had ever spoken to her like she mattered. Like she had a right to take up space. Amara looked away first. I'll consider it, she said. Ethan nodded once, like he already knew she would. Saturday came like a verdict. Amara stood in the mirror of the company apartment, staring at herself with disbelief. The gown was emerald, smooth, elegant, fitted in a way that didn't scream for attention but refused to hide her. Her hair was styled simply. Her mother's scarf lay folded in a drawer, safe because some parts of you don't belong on display. A knock sounded. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there in a black tuxedo, composed as always, until his eyes landed on her. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Not surprise at beauty. He had seen beauty. It was something else. Recognition. Like he was seeing the full shape of her for the first time. You're late, Amara said softly, because she needed to break the tension before it swallowed her. Ethan's mouth twitched. 2 minutes. Unacceptable, she replied. And just like that, the air shifted enough for them to breathe again. The hotel glittered with wealth. Cameras flashed. People laughed too loudly. Names floated through the room like currency. When Ethan stepped out of the car, photographers called him immediately. He moved through it like a man used to being watched. Then he offered his hand to Amara. When she stepped onto the carpet, the whispers began. Who is she? That's not Vanessa. She works for him, doesn't she? Amara felt her chest tighten, because whispers have a way of dragging you back to the places you fought to escape. Ethan leaned slightly toward her, voice low. Stay steady. I am steady, she murmured. Inside the ballroom, a woman in a silver gown approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan, she said, touching his arm like she owned history. You disappeared. Ethan's posture tightened. Business required attention. The woman's gaze slid to Amara. Cold. Measuring. And this? She asked. Ethan didn't flinch. Amara. No title. No explanation. Just her name placed in the room like a statement. Later, music filled the ballroom. Couples moved onto the dance floor. Ethan stepped toward Amara. Dance. It wasn't a question. You don't look like someone who enjoys dancing, she said. I don't, he replied. Then why? He paused and his honesty landed like a weight. Because I want to. When they moved together, it wasn't flashy. It wasn't a show. It was slow, controlled, and strangely intimate. And then, in the middle of that room full of sharp smiles and hungry eyes, Ethan laughed, once real and unguarded. Amara felt it like shock. Not because it was funny. Because it was human. Be honest, do you think Ethan is falling for her, or is this just another power game? Type love or power in the comments. The headlines came before the sun. Amara didn't see them first. Ethan did. He was already in his office early when his phone started vibrating again and again, the screen lighting up like an alarm that wouldn't stop. Billionaire CEO steps out with mystery woman. Who is she? Unqualified assistant linked to CEO, company risk? Photos from the gala spread across the internet like a punishment. Her face zoomed in. Her dress described. Her background guessed at, rewritten by strangers who enjoyed tearing down what they didn't understand. At the office the air changed. Smiles grew thin. Eyes lingered too long. People lowered their voices when she walked past. Amara stared at a screen showing her own image and felt old anger rise in her throat. Not anger at the camera. Anger at the world that needed to turn her into a villain simply because she stood beside power. Upstairs, a board meeting was called. In the room, voices sharpened. This is a conflict. This is bad optics. This looks like power imbalance. We need distance. They didn't say her name like she was a person. They said it like she was a stain. Ethan sat at the head of the table, face calm, eyes cold. Remove her, someone said. Ethan's response was quiet. No. A beat of stunned silence. You're risking the company for an employee, another voice pushed. Ethan's gaze hardened. I'm refusing to punish competence because of gossip. This is not how media works, someone snapped. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Then the media can learn how this company works. The meeting ended with tension hanging heavy in the air, not solved, not settled, just postponed by the fact that Ethan held the power to end arguments without raising his voice. Outside the boardroom, Amara waited, pretending to read a report while her heart pounded like a drum. Ethan walked out. "What happened?" she asked. "I said no," he replied. And in that moment she understood something terrifying. For the first time Ethan wasn't thinking only about outcomes. He was defending her. Rain came again. Not violent. Not furious. Just steady, deliberate drops sliding down the glass walls of Ethan's office late one evening. The city lights beyond the windows blurred into soft streaks, as if Lagos itself were watching quietly this time instead of judging. Amara stood near the window, arms folded, the headlines still echoing in her mind. The boardroom tension hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone silent, waiting for its next opportunity. Ethan watched her for a long moment before speaking. "I don't do this," he said. "Do what?" she asked, though she already knew. "Feel distracted." She turned to face him fully. "That's not distraction," she replied. "That's fear." His jaw tightened. "I'm not afraid." "You are," she said softly. "Just not of losing money." Silence stretched between them. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that sounds like something breaking loose. 2 years ago I was engaged. She sold information about my company to a competitor. For leverage. For power. She didn't even pretend it was personal. Amara didn't interrupt. "She said it was business," he continued. "That emotions complicate things. Since then I don't trust easily. I don't invest where there's risk I can't control." "And I'm risk," she said. He didn't deny it. "You see through me," he said quietly. "I see that you're not as cold as you pretend to be." The rain tapped against the glass as if agreeing. He stepped closer. "This wasn't strategy," he admitted. "Not the gala. Not the boardroom. Not tonight." Her breath slowed. "Then what is it?" He didn't hesitate this time. "I'm choosing you. No grand speech. No performance. Just truth." Her heart pounded because choice meant vulnerability. It meant no safety net. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their foreheads touched first. Not rushed. Not desperate. When he kissed her, it wasn't possession. It wasn't rescue. It was earned. And for the first time since the night she was thrown into the rain, Amara didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt wanted. Success has a way of waking the past. Amara's phone rang one afternoon while she was reviewing shipment data. The number was familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. She almost didn't answer. "Amara," came the voice she hadn't heard in months. "Aunt Lydia." "I saw you," Lydia said quickly. "On television. With that man." Of course she had. "What do you want?" Amara asked, voice calm. Pause. Then softer. "Can we meet?" They chose a small cafe near the old neighborhood. The place looked smaller than Amara remembered. The tables chipped. The air heavy with history. Lydia arrived looking older. Less sharp. Less certain. "You look well," Lydia said. "I am," Amara replied. There was no warmth. Only assessment. "I didn't know things would turn out like this," Lydia began. "Like what?" "With you, important." Important. As if that were the measure of worth. Silence hung between them until Lydia finally said it. "Your uncle lost his job." There it was. Not apology. Meet. "You want money?" Amara said evenly. Lydia looked down. Years of hunger. Years of insults. Years of being told she took up space. Amara could have refused. She could have reminded Lydia of the door slamming in the rain. Instead, she reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. "I forgive you," she said. Lydia blinked. "But forgiveness doesn't mean access." The words were steady. Final. "I won't return to that house. I won't pretend we're close. But I won't let you starve." Outside, Ethan waited by the car, not intruding, not interfering. When Amara stepped out, her face was calm. "You're okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. And she was. Not because Lydia deserved it, but because she refused to become what had hurt her. Ethan looked at her differently then. Not as someone he had helped, but as someone stronger than him. The coastline was quiet that evening. No cameras. No reporters. Just open sky bleeding into water as the sun lowered itself slowly toward the horizon. Ethan chose that place carefully. Not for display. For meaning. Amara walked barefoot across the sand, heels in hand, wind lifting her hair. I am, he answered. They stopped near the waterline. I built everything in my life alone, he began. I believed independence was strength, that needing someone made you weak. She listened. But somewhere between that night in the rain and you standing in rooms that tried to make you smaller, I understood something. He lowered himself onto one knee. Amara's breath caught. I don't want to stand ahead of you, he said. Or above you. He opened a small box. Equal. Always. The ring caught the last light of the sun. I don't want to rescue you, he continued. And I don't want to own you. I want to build with you. The waves crashed behind them. Will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision, but her voice was steady. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. And this time when he kissed her, it wasn't cautious. It was certain. They did not invite the press. They did not rent palaces. They chose a private garden overlooking the ocean where everything had begun to change. White flowers lined the aisle. Soft music carried through the air. Fewer than 100 guests stood witness, not to spectacle but to intention. Inside the gown Amara wore, sewn carefully into the lining, was a small strip of her mother's scarf. Hidden. Present. Proof that she had not forgotten who she had been before the storm. Ethan stood waiting beneath a simple floral arch, not nervous, but aware of what it meant to choose someone publicly when the world had once tried to tear them apart. When Amara walked toward him, she did so alone. Not because she had no family, but because she was no longer asking anyone for permission to enter her own life. Their vows were not dramatic. They were deliberate. He promised to stand beside her. She promised never to shrink. When they kissed, it was not about cameras. It was about survival transformed into partnership. At the reception, when glasses were raised and music filled the garden, Amara stepped forward and tapped her glass gently. I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go, she said. The room quieted. So tonight, instead of gifts, we are launching something. Ethan looked at her with surprise that quickly turned to admiration. The RAIN Initiative, she announced. Housing for young adults forced out of unstable homes. Education grants for those who cannot afford university. Job placement programs for people the system discards too quickly. We're funding the first 5 years privately, she continued. Not for attention. Not for praise. But because she remembered the weight of sitting against a gate in the rain with nowhere else to sit. Applause filled the garden. Ethan stepped beside her and took her hand. Built from a storm. Sustained by love. From being thrown out into the rain, to building homes for others. Do you believe destiny brought them together, or was it choice? Comment, destiny, or choice. And if this story touched you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.